Lotus Ventures Inc. is a BC-based medical marijuana company poised to launch into the rapidly evolving cannabis sector. Lotus is in the final review stage of the Health Canada approvals to become a licensed producer, having arranged facility financing of up to $12 million, plus building permits for its prototype indoor production facility. Shares trade under the symbol J on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Visit our website at lotusventures.ca.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Bob Mackin, award-winning investigative reporter and publisher of TheBreaker.news. His website, TheBreaker.ca. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Whistler has now become part of Calgary's unofficial bid for the Olympics right now?
That's right. Calgary is exploring an official bid for the 2026 Winter Olympics. Calgary, of course, hosted the 1988 Winter Olympics, and back then it was successful, but then again, it was a different time, different place. The world was a different place back then, and the business of the Olympics was a different business back then. Since then, the Olympics have grown in steroidal size. They're double and triple the size they were. Even the Winter Olympics, which the games of ice and snow are supposed to be smaller and more modest, but those have grown. We saw the biggest ones yet in Vancouver 2010, but even after that, in 2014 in Sochi, they were even bigger in Sochi. In fact, they were as big in Sochi, they had a Winter Olympic-sized bill. Some estimates have it that Vladimir Putin spent $50 billion with a B dollars on that. Since then, we had the Rio 2016 Summer Olympics, and many cities around the world have been scared away. The IOC has given the 2024 Summer Olympics to Paris and the 2028 Summer Olympics to Los Angeles because there were no other cities interested in either of those games. And now they're starting to look at the 2026 Winter Olympics. There are already various cities over in Europe that are getting cold feet. Although in North America, Calgary, which had the 1988 games, and Salt Lake, which had the 2002 games, are now looking at making bids. I would put more money on Salt Lake if they put together a viable bid than Calgary, just because Salt Lake is in the United States, and the big media companies, NBC especially, have put a lot of money into the Olympic movement over the years, and they want a return on their investment. And so is it really feasible for Calgary to make a bid if Salt Lake makes the bid? But if Calgary makes a bid, they're already talking about diffusing it, because the IOC is in such a big problem right now with cost overruns of big events and also corruption by those involved in organizing those big events, that not enough cities want to line up for it, so they're making various concessions. They've already softened the scheduling for the bid process. There's a new system where you can make a pre-application to make the bid. Before you decide to bid, you can communicate with the IOC and figure out if it's the right thing for your city. The IOC now is putting more money up front on the table to make this happen, and giving organizing committees in cities a little bit more leeway. But still, under this new regime, we haven't seen how that can be executed. So we have a situation where Calgary is looking at different ways to make it happen, and including having hockey in Edmonton, because Edmonton has a newer, bigger arena than Calgary does, of course. The Saddle Dome outdoor of 1988 is what the Calgary Flames want taxpayers to pay to replace. But there's no plan yet for that to happen to go forward. They're still dickering with Mayor Nenshi about the dollars and cents of that.
Edmonton still has the Northlands Coliseum, too.
They do, but any hockey would be at the Rogers
Right, but
Center.
they can use it for figure skating.
They could use that. They could look at other ideas, too, and still a lot of time till 2026, whereby they could get their act in gear and put some money on the table together between the oil men who own the Flames and also the taxpayers of Calgary still could make it happen. But what they also are looking at is events in British Columbia, specifically Whistler. Whistler has the Whistler Sliding Center left over, more than $100 million there. And, of course, they spent a similar amount on the Callahan Valley for the Whistler Olympic Center, for the cross-country skiing trails, for the ski jumps. The ski jumps, which will be used again in a few weeks. There is a pre-Olympic event for the Ski Jump World Cup circuit. This weekend, in fact, there is a bobsled and skeleton World Cup. So some of those venues in Whistler are getting used. The venues in Vancouver really wouldn't be part of the equation. It'd be very expensive to reconvert the Richmond speed skating oval back to long track speed skating because it's been turned into an all-sport community center. They took away the speed skating oval and put in hockey rinks, basketball courts, tennis courts, a whole variety of other uses. They'd have to spend a lot of money to make that happen again. Calgary still does have a speed skating oval left over from 1988. And, of course, the Vancouver Olympic Center is the old curling rink is now a community center at Hillside. So really, it'd be only feasible to use the Callahan Valley and the Whistler Sliding Center in a bid, but there still has to be a lot of things to happen to get to the bid stage, which would include conceptual arrangements of what the venues would look like, as well as funding commitments by governments. And there's no guarantee that would happen. There was a movement to try to make a bid for the 2022 Commonwealth Games by Victoria. The NDP looked at that because there really wasn't a viable business plan and said no, they're not going to put $400 million plus a blank check to cover cost overruns into that. So Calgary is still deciding whether to go ahead with an Olympic bid. Maybe we'll hear about that sometime next year or the year after. The next Olympics are in Pyeongchang, South Korea in February. The Olympics right now are in a tough spot, especially the Winter Olympics, because there is no NHL hockey participation in the next Olympics in Pyeongchang. They'll be at a different time of day. We'll be asleep while many of the events are happening, unless you are going to have insomnia and stay up overnight and have a lot of coffee and watch people who aren't in the NHL play hockey. The Winter Olympics are coming along, and I don't think there's much excitement for them, and there'll be a lot of questions, even for people in Calgary who are known for being a little bit more boosterish. Calgary has changed since 1988. Alberta has changed since 1988. I think that there would be a push to have a referendum. So the best thing for British Columbians to do is to keep an eye on what's happening in Calgary and how that might impact us here. And remember that the Vancouver 2010 Olympics were not the big celebration necessarily that we're sold and told that they were, because it was a very difficult event to happen. There were a lot of people having a lot of fun in downtown Vancouver, but at the same time, a lot of people didn't have fun, and an athlete died on the first day of the games in an accident that was preventable. So there has to be a lot of questions and a lot of consultation along the way if Calgary does decide ultimately to make that bid.
I don't recall an inquest being held into that slider's death.
It wasn't an inquest per se. It was an investigation by the coroner service. It took about 6 months before they released the documents, and they ordered a safety audit. And still a lot of questions about why that happened, especially when the CBC, Fifth Estate, was able to get its hands on some documents that it got through FOI, some internal correspondence in VANOC. John Furlong, the CEO, a year before the games, expressed concern that it was well known within those inside the International Luge Federation and inside the Vancouver Olympic Committee that there was a major problem at that venue, because as much as they tried to promote the fact it was the fastest track for bobsled, luge, and skeleton in the world, it was dangerously fast. There was actually an error in the construction. The engineer had given them plans to build it in such a way that there was a maximum speed that could be attained by the sliding athletes. And the sliding athletes were going much higher than that speed, 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers an hour above the recommended and designed speed. And there were athletes that were flying off the track long before February 12th, 2010, getting injured and having to be taken to hospital. And it may have been just a matter of time before one of them did die, and unfortunately it was Nodar Komatashvili, the 21-year-old from Georgia, in one of the last training runs on the opening day of the games before the actual competition began the next day at the Whistler Sliding Center. And that facility will always have that cloud over it, and it impacted many people. I've even recently interviewed one of the paramedics who was there on the day that happened, and it took a major toll on people. And so, the health and safety of athletes should be first and foremost. But Vancouver 2010 will always be remembered for two things: the amazing celebrations on the streets of downtown Vancouver, but also what happened in Whistler on the opening day of the games.
Coming up with Bob Mackin, we'll be discussing the Site C decision, the hydro dam in northeastern BC. Why haven't we heard anything about the wildfires that devastated BC, the worst forest fires that BC has ever suffered? We'll also take a look at BC's mysterious connection to the Paradise Papers, and how come the Evergreen line costs so much more than they said it would. We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead zinc silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineered gold mine in the Atlan district of northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the Site C dam decision in BC, it's going to cost billions of dollars whether they build it or whether they don't build it. What do you think they should do?
Oh, that's a tough decision there. One thing I think they should do is open the files. That is one thing that the NDP has not done yet, and I think is a major deficiency. The NDP got elected by saying they make BC better. They govern BC better, and they make it better for British Columbians, and part of that was going to be running a more transparent government. We haven't seen that yet from the BC hydro side of things. Michelle Mungal is the minister, who seems to be out of her element, and who seems to not want to talk to journalists who want to ask her that question. I've tried to ask that question since she announced the BC Utilities Commission review, which was the right thing to do. The BC Liberals, way back when they wanted to put this major investment forward, should have put it to the BC Utilities Commission right from the start, but I think they didn't, because they thought that the BC Utilities Commission could rein in the trade and maybe even recommend not going forward. Well, that recent report by the BC Utilities Commission after that accelerated review process cast a big doubt on this whole project. Whether this project is needed, and whether BC can afford this project, and whether there may be alternatives to it. But at the same time, there does appear to be that this project is beyond the point of no return, that in order to stop it, there would be a major expense, perhaps as much as $4 billion, to get out of all the contracts and to remediate the site and to bring it back to as close the condition as possible to the way it was when it started. But that would be one expenditure, maybe $4 billion, $2 billion to $4 billion. The other big expenditure is finishing it, and finishing it costs as much as $12 billion. This is a project that several years ago was supposed to cost maybe $6 billion. A couple years ago it was costing $8 billion. Now it's gone beyond the $9 billion mark, and BC Utilities Commission says it's likely to reach $10 billion, with $12 billion as a possible final bill when this is done in 2024 or so. So the question that I have is, why doesn't the NDP just open the files? I've made a bunch of Freedom of Information requests over the past several months for board meeting minutes for the project board, for Site C, for contracts, for spending. even for lists of employees, because that's been one of the employees and contractors. That's been one of the talking points over the last several months, is how many people really are working at Site C and how many people will be laid off. We're told it's between 2,000 and 2,400 or so, and the BC Liberals have used that as political fodder, saying that if the NDP is going to lay off people before Christmas, that affect the livelihoods of more than 2,000 families. Well, we don't really know how many people are actually working up there. They haven't issued a list. They haven't shown me the list of the names and titles of the employees for BC Hydro, their contractors, as well as for ministry staff that are on this. And it'd be interesting to know how many people are actually working on this project who are British Columbians or are temporary foreign workers. What would be the real impacts on this? And would any of these people be able to continue to work on or get positions with any contractors should there have to be the remediation process if the NDP goes thumbs down? But a big hint of where this is going is that even though the NDP ordered the review in order to help please Andrew Weaver and the Greens, who helps the NDP get into power, they did not stop work on the project. Work has proceeded on the project every day since the review was ordered back in August, and it continues to this day, and it will continue up until the day that the NDP says yay or nay, and probably continue the day after. They have let it go, and they're under major pressure from the industrial unions that have put a lot of money into the NDP coffers over the years. There's cash for access and pay to play in action, you could say. And those union heads are lobbying hard for them to go straight ahead and finish this project. Now, is the NDP going to weigh what the BC Utilities Commission said and look at other aspects and trust the judgment of the staff, of the bureaucrats? Or are they going to look at this through a political lens? Because if they look at this through a political lens, then they could use this to bash the Liberals from now till kingdom come, like the Liberals bashed the NDP for so many years about the fast ferries. Well, this is exponentially bigger than the fast ferries, and the NDP might use that and just say, well, Liberals, you made us do it, so we're going to continue on, but any of the costs are going to be your fault, and they'll use that going forward for decades to come. They may not make the right decision for British Columbians, but they may decide to make the decision that makes it feel best for their political aspirations. And that isn't the way that decision-making should be made in BC. It should be made in the best interest of British Columbians, of taxpayers. But this might come down to a political decision. We'll see how it goes. They say that they'll tell us before the end of the year. Of course, the year ends December 31st. They still have some breathing room. We'll see what they do. This could be a defining moment for the NDP. Could be a defining moment for the British Columbia taxpayers, because this is a growing province, and we do need more power. We do need more power done efficiently, but we also have a situation where BC Hydro is not the Crown Corporation people used to be proud of. It is a Crown Corporation with many problems, and many problems that the NDP in the 1990s and the Liberals since then are to blame with.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the pink CYDVF, and on Frankfurt C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Bob Mackin. Bob, BC suffered its worst wildfire season ever. Has there been any investigation into why that happened, and has there been any measures taken to prevent it from happening again?
No and no. There was back in 2003 when BC had a previous terrible year of wildfires, a report that was done afterwards by former Manitoba Premier Gary Filmon. We have not heard anything from the NDP yet about anything similar being done. And I think the people whose lives were deeply affected by this, who lost their houses, lost their livelihoods, lost their forests and farms, are very anxious to see something happen, because there were quite a lot of decisions that were made to fight certain fires in certain ways, and decisions made to not fight certain fires in certain ways. And people lost houses that I talked to, people that were affected by the Elephant Hill wildfire and by other wildfires in the province, such as the Plateau wildfire. This was a record wildfire season. We don't know the whole economic damage of it, but people essentially were left either homeless or left with worthless homes because of the damage, and they want to know who is accountable and who should be accountable. And the NDP, who got into power a few weeks after the state of emergency was declared, were essentially in charge of executing playbooks that had been written for this under BC Liberal rule. And I don't know why they're not hurrying up. This could be a chance for them to also look back and criticize the BC Liberals. You'd think they'd want to do that for political purposes at least. But they have not done that. So we're still waiting for the BC NDP government to appoint someone to be the reviewer or investigator of this terrible summer, because we need to know what went wrong and we need to know what went right in order for the wildfire service to be prepared for future summers. There will be more fires next summer. And we need them to be prepared to fight them. And there will be other natural disasters in British Columbia as well. Some of the lessons that were learned in planning, preparation, as well as execution in the interior wildfires this year could be applied to other emergency British Columbia operations in future. We're told we're going to get an earthquake, a big earthquake someday in the Lower Mainland or in Vancouver Island. Well, we need our emergency preparation to be top-notch, and any big natural disaster needs to be properly understood and learnings come from it. The one thing that the NDP government has apparently said okay to so far is the ordering of 2,000 BC Wildfires 2017 souvenir hats. That was announced on the BC Bid website earlier this fall. And the government tells me that those who gave significant time working on the fires for the BC Wildfire Service will get these souvenir baseball caps, and some agencies also provided support for the operation will get other things like plaques. Of course, people that did put their blood and sweat and tears into this should get a nod. But this shouldn't be the only thing the government's doing. This is a major deficiency to just go out there and order hats. 2,000 of these hats, which will be in navy blue with the BC Wildfire Service insignia on front, and BC Wildfires 2017 on the back.
Will they be going to the people who lost their homes and businesses?
That doesn't appear to be part of the plan, which is rather unfortunate, because a lot of these people, they got essentially $1,500 from the Red Cross to help them continue to put food on the table for a little while and replace clothes and do whatever they could. $1,500 doesn't go very far if you've lost everything. It seems that those people who that I've talked to up in the Pressy Lake area and also the Nasco Valley area who basically lost everything, they're wondering and waiting, when will there be someone made accountable for this, for not fighting the fires in the ways they should, and will BC learn any lessons from this?
The Paradise Papers that found out that people like former Prime Ministers Brian Mulroney and Chick, our local politician who was Prime Minister for a little while, Paul Martin, they're involved in overseas no tax regimes. But BC now has a connection that you've discovered.
Yes, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists published the database we'd seen a steady stream of stories by the outlets, media outlets with their international partners over the last few weeks. But at the end of the middle week of November, they published the database. So you can go to the database and search, and just put in various names and places. I put in British Columbia, and lo and behold, what came out was the British Columbia Investment Management Corporation had some investments in Bermuda. The BC Investment Management Corporation is one of the least known Crown corporations, yet one of the richest. BC Investment Management Corporation is the Crown corporation which is involved in investing public sector pension funds. They have, as of last year, $135.5 billion with a B dollars in assets under management. That's a huge investment portfolio. Their job is to increase that portfolio every year so that there are bigger and better returns to public servants and their pension funds so that they can live happily ever after. Well, BC Investment Management Corporation, turns out, has various subsidiaries, real estate subsidiaries of different names that were incorporated via the Lawson Lundell law firm in Vancouver, and they also had some that were incorporated in Hamilton, Bermuda, with the Appleby law firm. Appleby law firm is the firm which held the data that we see in the Paradise Papers that was leaked to various media outlets. And so there's serious questions about what was happening between BC Investment Management Corporation and a company called China Homes Limited. This company was incorporated in Bermuda in October 1987. It lasted until the end of 2009. Its auditor was the Shanghai office of PricewaterhouseCoopers. And for a very brief period in 2002, for about 9 months, two of the people that were on the board of directors for China Homes Limited were executives from BC Investment Management Corporation. The Vice President of Real Estate, Charles Swanson, and the CEO, Douglas Pierce. They were both on the board of China Homes Limited, and they're both listed in the Paradise Papers. And the question is, why? It's not necessarily against the law for companies to open up offshore shell companies to lessen their tax bill, but sometimes it can be against the law for them to do that. We don't know why BCIMC did the business this way and what they were doing in business with China Homes Limited and why they apparently are no longer in business with them, because BC Investment Management Corporation does not want to talk about it. I contacted BCIMC and they respectfully declined to comment. I haven't heard back from their chair, Peter Milburn, who's a former Deputy Minister of Finance, and also haven't yet heard from the Office of Finance Minister Carol James, who, like the rest of the NDP, came into power in July. What happened here and during the 2000s was when they were out of office. But BC Investment Management Corporation was doing some sort of deal, offshore deal in Bermuda with the company, the law firm Applebee's, that is heavily involved in doing business with all sorts of interesting international individuals, business people, politicians, to help them either lessen their tax bill or avoid taxes altogether.
Now we get to the Evergreen line, which the people in the Tri-Cities area of the Lower Mainland of Vancouver, Port Moody, Port Coquitlam were promised about 30 years ago, and they finally got it. But this was not a cheap line to build. They had a lot of construction problems, collapses, probably because there's limestone in the area, and that creates sinkholes. But there's also another sinkhole where millions of dollars disappeared. Can you maybe talk about that?
Yes, indeed. The first anniversary of the Evergreen line's opening is coming up in December. And it took me a while. I asked for it since early 2016. I wanted to see the change orders, and we talked about it last time. The change order logs are basically just a list of changes to the construction contract, costs that were added, costs that were subtracted, why they were subtracted or added, what extra work had to be done, and what that cost. And this is something that I fought hard for, and the BC Liberals did their best to make sure I didn't get it and the public didn't see it before the election happened in May. the NDP got into power, and the NDP had a bit of a change of heart. They told the civil servants that yes, indeed, and they told their government lawyer that yes, indeed, this should be made public. So the government dropped its opposition to making the records public. SNC-Lavalin still fought against it, although they didn't file any evidence of why it should be kept secret. So finally, recently, the Information and Privacy Commissioner's adjudicator ruled in favor of public disclosure. I got the documents, and the list was about $11 million of changes to the contracts for the Evergreen line. SNC-Lavalin was the main contractor. Nearly $900 million was their contract out of this total $1.43 billion mega project. And some serious questions about why they kept it away from me in the first place, and also why they made these extra expenditures. There was about $3.2 million extra spent on a bus loop and parking lot to make that permanent. It was temporary, but they decided to make it permanent. Instead of putting that out to tender, they just let SNC-Lavalin do it. Normally, they have to, for any multi-million-dollar contract, go to public tender and advertise it and let there be competition so that the best price can be found for taxpayers. But that didn't happen here. There was $1 million extra of changes for utility conflicts with TELUS and BC Hydro, because you got to build these things around phone lines and hydro lines. The question is, why didn't they have those ducks in order before they even put their put the shovel to the ground in the first place? They spent $700,000 in noise barriers. They had to spend $600,000 extra on flagging and minor roadworks and paving changes around the area where the sinkholes were happening. They had to put up new retaining walls for more than $400,000. They had to spend another $380,000 to remove pollution from a creek near the Coquitlam Park and Ride extension. And they also spent about $150,000 on attaching public art to infrastructure. They said that the public art committees that selected the art were set up after the contract was signed, so they didn't know what the public art was going to look like, that they had to attach to the infrastructure. So they had to spend about $11 million extra. Not only that, though, the government told me that they spent even more. $19 million in changes for items not included in the original contract, and $17 million on unanticipated items. So $36 million extra. They still say it came in under budget by about $79 million, but that's what the government says. That's what people at Partnerships BC say. But this hasn't been properly vetted independently, and they've been less than forthcoming about doing interviews with the public, with the press, and less than forthcoming about showing the documents. And again, this is a major project that was involved with SNC-Lavalin as the major contractor, and that company has been in trouble around the world, attracting attention by police, by lawyers, for a variety of corruption allegations, and some of them have been proven, others not yet, in various construction projects in various continents, and there will be more court actions back east in next year and the year after. This is a company which has acknowledged that it had some serious integrity problems. And, of course, the former chair of the company, Gwen Morgan, was on previous Premier Christy Clark's transition team, a key advisor of hers back when she became the Premier. Of course, she's no longer the Premier, but we now still live with both the costs and benefits of BC Liberal rule, and still have many questions about the Evergreen line, SNC-Lavalin's work in it, and by the way, SNC-Lavalin is also one of the several contractors involved in Site C.
Bob, excellent digging, and we hope to hear more.
Thank you.
My guest has been Bob Mackin, award-winning investigative reporter and publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.